Hello again, and welcome to what I'm calling Bite-Sized Kirkegaard. So I haven't yet posted the very first video because I was half convinced I would not continue this series. Like a lot of things in my life, I start them and never finish them. Um, Unfortunately, that's the way things are, but here's the second video. So these are going to materialize, it seems like. And today is New Year's Day, 2021. So we're out of that horrible year and hopefully into a better year. Just by magic of numbers, everything has gotten better now, right? But well, we'll hope for the best anyway. So cautiously optimistic, as I'll say. But yeah, I wanted to continue this series, and we're starting with Kierkegaard's writings, which there's a lot, which I explained in the previous video. If you haven't seen that, please see that. That's a general introduction to who is this guy, why do I think he's interesting, why is it worthwhile going through this. And this first book that we're doing, let me just make sure I get this. Yes. I kind of miscommunicated last time that this was edited by the Hongs, which are the usual translation for this series. But in this case, it's actually Julia Watkin who is the translator, and she was the editor for this too. The early polemical writings, collection of sort of like a mix of random writings, which are a little bit more challenging than usual because they're so contextual. They're so much a product of Kierkegaard's times. Whereas his later writings are more, universal. But these are reacting directly against things that were happening in his time. And this video, I wanted to make it short, so I want to take two chunks out of here. It's not the complete thing, but the first part is another defense of women's great abilities. The second one is a collection of Kierkegaard's publishings when he was going on the attack in newspapers regarding the topic of censorship. But it was a little bit like just flexing his muscles. And this first article, too, was also that, kind of just flexing his witticisms, practicing, but kind of anticipating later on that second part, a little bit of his battles with newspapers and so forth. Yeah, so anyway, we'll just launch right into the first one. First one is, in retrospect, a little unfortunate because now we're in a time when we're thinking, okay, like times have changed. Obviously, it's been a while since Kierkegaard wrote this, and he's quite literally living in the past when all of his contemporaries, the conservative position at the time was, a woman's place is in the home. And the man's place is out in society and so forth. So reading this very short article today seems very misogynistic, and indeed it is. If you read Julia Watkins' excellent commentary on it, which I have here, I happen to have commentary for this, which helps a lot for these writings, actually. She explains it well, and then actually doesn't really give an apology for it, but kind of contextualize it a little bit more, framing it in Kierkegaard's own thought and kind of defending why would Kierkegaard be against women's liberation in general? Like, wouldn't that be a good thing? And, Kierkegaard's all about the power of the individual and so forth. So why would he be, against women, like individual women, standing up for themselves and things like that? Seems very antithetical to something he'd do. So it's a little bit, it's difficult, but Julia Watkins kind of sets it up in this way, saying that it's more. Let me actually open this up here. I think I'm trying to get used to using those little post-it tabs. Helps me through here. This is a general summary of what's going on here. This piece clearly concerns the issue of equality as well as freedom, and yet it seems more This piece clearly concerns the issue of equality as well as freedom, and yet it seems more flagrant than the articles of 1836, where Kierkegaard displays, relatively speaking, a greater seriousness of intention. Here, Kierkegaard does not seem at all interested in making contact with the subject of women's position in society. Instead, he seems to be penning an exercise in wit rather than wisdom, with women as the target of his irony. And so basically, it's sort of like, okay, like here's an easy target. The Kirkhardt is defending the conservative position, which is the majority position at the time, and saying that women should stay in the home and all this stuff that seems really antiquated, and indeed it is. But yeah, a little bit of context for this. This is in the wake of the French Revolution, and then even more recently, it was Heiberg gave some lectures in 1833, and he actually invited women to join the audience at the lectures, which was very unusual at the time. So there was all this talk in the air, which was like debate: can women even understand these lectures and all this sort of kind of what we think of as like, this is nonsense now, but like it was like opening the door to them. It was the first step in letting them into society. So it was controversial at the time. So this was emerging as part of that. But yeah, I think this is a very short article, but there's just one more thing I wanted to say. Actually, I had some more tabs, which might help me out here if I pay attention to my own my own notes. A little bit of defense of Kierkegaard's position. First, it must be noted that Kierkegaard considers that although there is a fundamental equality between men and women before God, there are fundamental differences between the sexes. In his writings over the years, a picture emerges of a woman as a being more spontaneous and authentically herself than man, as instinctive, sensitive, imaginative, and self-sacrificing. She is seen as making temporality in the form of home, husband, and children the center and goal of her existence, and as relating intellectually to the religious through the man. Man, on the other hand, is seen as more intellectually oriented than women, with interest in questions beyond temporality. He's able to face conflict, etc., etc. This was, I think, the highlight of this, which helped me frame this a little better. There's a second point here, and this is on this commentary. It's page 18, if you happen to have this. The second thing one needs to note about Kierkegaard's attitude to women's emancipation, though, is that it is linked to his negative attitude to numbers, to humanity in the mass. A man, says Kierkegaard in his journals for 1849, already, even as a lad, is demoralized by having to be like the others, and as a youth, to say nothing of the adult, is completely demoralized by learning how things go in practical life in actuality. This very knowledge is the ruination of him. If girls were brought up in the same way, then good night to the whole human race, because women is granted distance from life for a period. She retains her individuality, is a bit closer to ideality. In this context, emancipation is, quote, the invention of the devil, end quote, because it tends towards the same upbringing the men receive. In other words, men have to be involved in the dirty practicalities of life, including the horrid business of voting. But there's no need to drag women into it too. So it's a little bit like, okay, here's the reality of the world. It's a sick place, and we shouldn't drag women into it too. But like, counterpoint to that, like, it seems like women should be given the opportunity to make the decision for themselves, obviously. Well, in retrospect, all this seems very obvious to us, but that's an interesting explanation from someone who's very, I would say, like, biased towards Kierkegaard, because she's studying and she's the translator of this book too, so she's going to be a little bit on his side. But she does mention outright that, like, yes, Kierkegaard's misogynist in this point, like all of his, most of his contemporaries were. It's unfortunate, but that's that. And it's a short work, so, but yeah, it's setting the tone for the rest of this book, which is sort of like, this is okay, this is different than the rest of his works, so a little trickier to get through. The second part I thought was more interesting. This is a collection of papers that were published, and it's Kierkegaard interacting with the press of the time, and this anticipates, if you're familiar with it, the Corsair affair, which we're going to get to eventually, hopefully. Newspapers attacking him, parodying him, and even drawing cartoons of him, mocking him, which kind of devastated him later in life. But this is him beginning his fight with the press. So it's a little interesting to see. But I think the biggest thing to take away from this is that Kierkegaard is again interested in flexing his muscles and being witty, and get the idea that this is the kind of person he is, that he likes to stir up debate and agitate. But he's interested in the more of the literature side of things and talking about things in literary ways. He's not that interested in the politics of it. So the background context for all this is freedom of the press. Should the Danish crown censor the Danish press? The conservative position is with the crown, which it appears to be that Kierkegaard is that position. Although it's a little more nuanced than that. I think he was misinterpreted later on because these papers were it basically became like hearsay, and then they've been republished now, and we've scrapped it together, and it turns out he's not that. It's a little more nuanced, and I'm not an expert on it, but there's a little bit of that, like looking back, that there's a little disconnect between what his writings actually said and what people said of those writings later on. But in any case, that's getting a little too deep in the weeds there. What I wanted to mention with these, and also that another defense of women's great abilities, they're signed by his pseudonyms. So that first one is signed by A. There's another one that's signed by B. So this is like this is the first time we see these pseudonyms, which we'll see a lot more. If you're familiar with either or, they use the pseudonyms too, and their pseudonyms continue throughout his work. Various names interacting with each other. But yeah, I think the biggest takeaway from these, that there's some things that anticipated future topics or future subjects, which I found interesting. And so I just made a list of these, and with page numbers. So again, if you have this translation, which I was calling the Hong translation, this is actually the Watkin translation, part of the Hong series. If you have that, you can follow along. I'm listing the page numbers, but I thought it's interesting. Page 9, there's some talk about looking forward, looking backward. It seems very Kierkegaardian. I really liked, actually, this little... Oh, I got to bring this up because it's a little excerpt about dogs yapping. So, just annoying little yappy dogs, which reminded me of a movie I saw recently. On page 10, one tolerates a large dog barking, even in the wrong place. But these little dogs that always yap and in the moment of danger creep into hiding are intolerable. It's just like a little incidental thing, but it's like little things like this pop out of Kierkegaard's text, and it makes you kind of smile or laugh sometimes. And that was one thing that reminded me of a movie that I saw, which was a South Korean movie called Barking Dogs Never Bite, and it's about one of those little yappy dogs, and some unfortunate events that follow. I won't give it away anything, but it's kind of, I can sympathize with people who are really dislike these little yappy dogs, and it's a test of my will. Anyway, that popped out at me. That was funny. Page 18 and 19, there's some talk about a knight, and I believe there. Later on page 48, he does mention Don Quixote. So there's this knight imagery already sort of appearing. Of course, Kirkhardt is known for a knight of faith, which we'll get into, but a little anticipation towards that. Also, page 21 and also page 37, there's talk about sort of like old middle-aged life in the monastery, like life's dialectic, and then retreating to the monastery on page 21. Page 37, there's like this Hermit Age, which is maybe a little different than monastery. It's similar though, but Kierkegaard is saying sort of like this age has passed by. They tried this out and it didn't really work. I believe it's reminiscent of stuff that he mentions later on, so I just picked that out. On page 24, of course, he mentions clash with the Copenhagen Post. This anticipates his clash with the Corsair. Let me see here. page 36, there's some mention of novelty, and I thought that, okay, this is anticipating the aesthetic life and the repetition, I believe it is, where it's like the aesthetic life is like looking for all these new things, and novelty is like the object, sort of unsatiated, never satisfied, just like chasing after novelty. It reminded me of that. On page 40, as I previously said, it sort of iterates or reiterates that Kierkegaard is sort of against politics. His focus is on the literature side of things. Page 47 was very interesting, basically saying life is not the abstract. And then again, a mention of leaping forward and backward. Again, this leaping phrasing is very Kierkegaardian. The Kierkegaard is also known for leap of faith. If you've heard of that, that comes directly from Kierkegaard. So this talk of leaping back and forth, very reminiscent of that. Anticipation, I should say, not reminiscent. The bustling busyness of the time. This is very Kierkegaardian. Life is just busyness. Like what is it all about? It's just busyness. I can't even read my own writing. This is terrible. Nascent paper, like, yeah. On page 49, I think I just like the imagery here. He's talking about this new paper that he's writing against, and he's saying that it's a nascent paper. It's like planets forming out from a nebula now, that it's still trying to find its way, find its direction. Like, it's like I just like that imagery. Yeah, and yeah, on page 51, there's a little talk of pseudonymous authorships or anonymous authorships as well in newspapers at the time. Actually, let me open that up, because I know there's some sort of confusion about that too. Like, like Kirkhardt is not unique. Like it was pretty commonplace at the time that people would have pseudonyms that they'd even reuse, and sometimes people could guess who was behind the pseudonym. There's a few famous ones at the time. I forgot exactly what they are, but in the Soren Kierkegaard biography, they mention a few, and so some of them are like more mysterious than others. Here we go. Yes, if he stepped forward perhaps a bit rashly, yet for that very reason with fire and force, and let himself be carried away. On page 51, the top, and exposed himself to censure. Well, he would judge him otherwise, but recollect too that these tightrope walkers most often are also masked, synonymous, or anonymous, and if it were otherwise in good and vigorous pieces, that one might allow himself such adroit acrimonies, etc. It's just some incidental thing, but it's popped out at me because like Kierkegaard is very much a pseudonymous author. That is his style. And when he starts writing books, he's even writing them and signing pseudonymous authors to them. As part of indirect communication. So, but all things that we could save for future videos, which I'm hoping there'll be more of. This has already gone on 20 minutes, which is way longer than I expected. But yeah, next time we're gonna go through some more from this book. Oh, and one thing I want to mention, my grandma, who passed away a few years ago, she left me a lot of these bookmarks from places she'd visited and things she'd found interesting. So I'm going to be using a lot of her bookmarks to get through these. And then this one I just wanted to show, if you can see this. That's the front, and then back. Oh, there it goes. Upside down, sideways, and all. So this is a place apparently she visited. Sturgeon Bay Ship Canal, North Pierhead Light, Sturgeon Bay, Door County, Wisconsin. So she really liked lighthouses. So probably not the last time we're going to see a lighthouse bookmark. But yeah, next time we're going to continue through this and hopefully finish up this first book, and then we can make our way into the next one. So join me next time. Thank you. See you next time. Bye.